Happy Sunday. We're so happy to have you with us for part two of The Guardian. Now, we have Miss Violetta Zane with us. Violetta is an artist, a graphic designer. She works for a family school in Pointe-Noire in the Republic of Congo. In 2020, Violetta and Adid Masumian launched the Utterance Project. It's a YouTube channel and a website dedicated to sharing the beauty of the utterances of Baha'u'llah, the Bab, and Abdu'l-Baha in the original Arabic and Persian, with English subtitles and transliteration. Violetta is the author of 3 illustrated chronologies on the central figures of the Baha'i Faith. The first being the Primal Point, the second, the Blessed Beauty, the third, for Abdu'l-Baha, the Extraordinary Life of Abdu'l-Baha, and what we are now discussing, The Guardian, Shoghi Effendi. You can find all of the publications and the 3 chronologies at www.theutteranceproject.com. I'll repeat, theutteranceproject.com. We are so happy to have Violetta here today. We want to thank the institution sponsoring this, namely the Clearwater Baha'is, the local community, and also the Immersive Ocean, the organization that is also contributing to understanding religious ideas and writings and interfaith dialogue. So you can find that at immersiveocean.org as well. With that being said, for those of you who are just joining us and you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, we invite you, please, to go to clearwaterbaha'is.org so you can join the Zoom sessions as we are going to be continuing them for the next several weeks. Now we begin part 2. We thank all of you for joining. And again, Violetta, welcome. We're so happy to have you this week again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. I look forward to this every week. I'm going to be sharing my screen now. Let's see. That work?
Yes, ma'am. We can see it.
Good. Okay, so this is very exciting. We're going to be spending 8 years with Shoghi Effendi today in the next hour and a half. And I called this part Egypt and Lebanon because Shoghi Effendi comes to Egypt 3 or 4 times while Abdu'l Baha, his beloved grandfather, is in Egypt during his journeys to the West. He would always come in winter in Egypt because the winter in Egypt was so much balmier and warmer than the winter in England or France. And also Lebanon because we're going to be looking at Shoghi Effendi's university studies. So for anyone who's between the ages of 14 and 21, this is Shoghi Effendi when he was your age. So The Guardian Part 2, 1910, 1918, Egypt and Lebanon. This part covers the life of Shoghi Effendi from the age of 13 in 1910 to the age of 21 in 1918, where we will pick up next week. 1910, Shoghi Effendi with Abdu'l Baha in Egypt. On the 29th of August, 1910, Shoghi Effendi saw Abdu'l Baha leave Haifa. Abdu'l Baha was forced to leave Haifa for his journeys to the West without informing anyone because of the covenant breakers and the danger to his person. He had so many enemies. So in the evening of the 29th of August, Shoghi Effendi was sad and sorrowful, and he sat on the steps of the master's house and said, "The master is now on board the ship. He has left me behind, but surely there is a wisdom in this." This is the ship that Abdu'l Baha sailed on, the Khedivial Mail Steamship Company's Corsair. And yes, there is a wisdom in this. And Abdu'l Baha would not forget his grandson. He would call for him as soon as he arrived in Egypt, and Shoghi Effendi would join him there. I want to just introduce you to a wonderful book called Blessings Beyond Measure, Recollections of Abdu'l Baha and Shoghi Effendi by Ali Yazdi. It is an extraordinary book filled with gems from the heroic and formative ages of the faith. Ali Yazdi was blessed to be Shoghi Effendi's closest and most intimate friend in their childhood and adolescence. And Ali Yazdi's niece is here today with us. Maybe she can say a few words at the end. So in September, October 1910, Shoghi Effendi and Ali Yazdi become friends in Ramleh. And here you have Shoghi Effendi seated here. And standing behind Shoghi Effendi is Ali Yazdi here. This is a photograph taken in Egypt, in Ramleh in 1910. So immediately after leaving Haifa on the 29th of August, 1910, Abdu'l-Bahá sent for Shoghi Effendi to join him in Port Said, and then they traveled together to Ramleh, which is a different city along the coast, more to the western part of Egypt. Egypt lays flat along the coast of Africa like this. And Ali Yazdi describes Shoghi Effendi at 13 as always dignified, even as a young boy, but also friendly, energetic, eager, and full of life. Ali Yazdi visited their villa often and spent time with Shoghi Effendi and was always waiting to catch a glimpse of Abdu'l-Bahá. Everyone inside was busy talking one day until all of a sudden a hush came over the room, and Abdu'l-Bahá, beautiful, very resonant voice, was heard as he was sweeping into the room with his abbas robe flowing and always straight as an arrow, and his head thrown back. He was wearing a white turban. And Abdu'l-Bahá looked at everyone and welcomed them all, saying, Khushamadid, welcome, welcome. And that was the first time Ali Yazdi ever heard Abdu'l-Bahá speak. This is a house that Abdu'l-Bahá lived in Ramleh. It's a little bit bigger than on the photograph here. He lived in this house in 1912, so not while this story is taking place, 2 years later. Abdu'l-Bahá had tried to sail to Europe after spending a month in Port Said, but it was very clear that he was too exhausted and he needed additional rest. So he moved to Alexandria. And of course, we all know, knowing Abdu'l-Bahá, that rest for Abdu'l-Bahá does not mean the same thing as rest for a normal person. He was extremely busy. He was visiting people in the city. He gave his love without counting. And that is how he spent the winter of 1910, shortly before going to Europe. And after that, Shoghi Effendi went back to school in Lebanon. Abdu'l-Bahá went back to Europe went to Europe for the first time. And in April of 1911, Shoghi Effendi returns from Lebanon and spends time in Ramleh with Abdu'l-Bahá, so a year after the first picture was taken. And this is sort of the landscape of Alexandria, Ramleh at the time. There was a tram which Abdu'l-Bahá would board and pay for himself that would take him to Alexandria. Ramleh was a suburb of Alexandria. And he spent his days, as usual, filled with pilgrims and visitors, dictating tablets to 2 secretaries at once. And there's this centrifugal force around Abdu'l-Bahá, which in a few years, we're going to see around the Guardian. This work of the covenant, this constant sort of swoosh of energy of answering letters and writing and responding and visitors and pilgrims and they share this. They share this. It's the work of the covenant, the work of the center of the covenant, the work of the Guardian. During his visit in April 1911, one of the most interesting things that happens is Louis Gregory arrives on pilgrimage to meet Abdu'l-Bahá for the first time. And Louis Gregory spontaneously, when he arrives to see Abdu'l-Bahá, spontaneously bends over and bows his head, and Abdu'l-Bahá walks over and kisses his head. And Abdu'l-Bahá is very concerned about race relations, something that he will continue to be concerned about when he visits the year after, when he goes to America. After 6 days in the presence of Abdu'l-Bahá, Louis Gregory and his friends leave Ramleh to go to visit the holy places in the Holy Land. And they arrive at the house and they are greeted by a 14-year-old Shoghi Effendi and one of his cousins. And this is their farewell visit with Abdu'l Baha. And one of Louis Gregory's companions says, "Another year, we hope to see you in America." To which Abdu'l-Bahá replies with his eyes twinkling, "Will you bring an airplane and steal me away?" So he always, but the plan is there. And Abdu'l-Bahá had made a condition that he would only go to the United States if the American Baha'is were united. And he will eventually travel. And that is the next story, with a little twist, because Shoghi Effendi prepares to travel to America with Abdu'l Baha between the 24th and the 25th of March, 1912. But first, on the 24th of March, 1912, Shoghi Effendi shows Ali Yazdi his cabin on the RMS Cedric. This is not a photograph of the RMS Cedric. All those pictures were copyrighted. So this is the White Star, same line, different ship, the Olympic. This is a reading room. And all those ships at the time would have had a reading room where people could read, and with, real chairs and real desks and a real fireplace. It looks like a real floating home on the sea. So after his first journey to Europe from August to December 1911, Abdu'l-Bahá is back in Ramleh for the winter. And he has prepared the trip to go with Shoghi Effendi. So he's ordered long robes for his grandson, 2 turbans, 1 green, 1 white. And when Shoghi Effendi arrives in Alexandria, Abdu'l-Bahá's eyes shine with pride when he tries on the clothes his grandfather has ordered for him. Shoghi Effendi is 14 years old now. And he's been following very, very closely his grandfather's travels with Star of the West while he's been in Beirut. And he's heard so much about America. He's so excited. And his best friend, Ali Yazdi, is there. And he says, "Sheikh Ali." So this is a joke that you're going to hear several times in this chronology. Both Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi nickname Ali Yazdi Sheikh Ali. I think the nickname began with Abdu'l-Bahá. Anyway, so Shoghi Effendi says, "Sheikh Ali, would you like to go to the ship with me and see my cabin?" Just feel how excited Shoghi Effendi is. And Ali Yazdi enthusiastically replies, "Sure." So they take the tram from Ramleh, they go to the port, they get on the boat, the ship, and they see his cabin. And it was just a beautiful, majestic ship. And Shoghi Effendi was just so excited. And he promises he's going to write to his friend when he arrives in America. And finally, the day of the departure is here on the 25th of March, and they sail to America. This is actually the Cedric, the ship that Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi and their party sailed on to go to America. So they were accompanied by about 30 silent believers. They took the electric tram again to the port, and they boarded the ship. And with Abdu'l-Bahá were his personal attendants, Sayyid Asadullah Qumi and Agha Khosraw, who was of Burmese descent, and his translator, Dr. Amin Farid, who is going to be a really evil covenant breaker. He is related by blood to Abdu'l-Bahá's wife, Munir Khanum. He is her nephew, one of her nephews. And just like that, Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi are off to America, when tragedy strikes at their very first stop. From the 29th of March to the 30th of March, Shoghi Effendi is cruelly turned back. So this is a medical inspection at Ellis Island, and it's very relevant here because this is what stopped Shoghi Effendi. It was engineered by the covenant breaker Amin Farid, but there was an outbreak of trachoma, which is a contagious bacterial infection in the eyes that can lead to blindness. And no one could enter the United States with trachoma. At the time, actually, almost a quarter of Native Americans, roughly 72,000 people, had trachoma. So they had an outbreak inside the US, but they were very careful with people coming in. So they had to inspect their eyes, and they would turn people back if they had signs of trachoma. And so when they arrived in Naples, the Italian doctors declared 3 Baha'is unfit for travel because they had signs of trachoma in their eyes. The 3 people were Aga Hosrau, the very close friend and assistant to Abdu'l Baha and his cook, Mirza Munir Izain, and the 14-year-old Shoghi Effendi. This was entirely engineered by Dr. Amin Farid. As early as 1912, he had already started down this path to covenant breaking that would just consume his soul. And he would make Abdu'l Baha's life absolutely miserable in America. And Dr. Farid took the side of the Italian doctors, and he just gave argument against argument after argument for keeping the 3 people off the ship, including Shoghi Effendi. And Shoghi Effendi always knew, the rest of his life, he always knew that it was Dr. Farid who had prevented him from going on this trip with his beloved grandfather. So on the 30th of March, after a full day of pleading without getting anywhere, Abdu'l Baha is forced to let his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, disembark. And this collage is a collage of the Italo-Turkish war that was raging at the time between Italy and Turkey. And with their fezzes and their oriental robes, there is also an element of prejudice that played into this disembarkation. They thought that Abdu'l Baha told his friends that they think we are Turks. And so in the end, Shoghi Effendi and his 2 companions left the ship, deeply, deeply sad. And Abdu'l Baha would keep talking about this for a few days after it happened. He was very, very saddened by this event, both him and Shoghi Effendi. So early April 1912, Shoghi Effendi is back in Ramleh instead of being in the United States. This is him at the age of 15 during his studies in Beirut. And he went and saw doctors when he got back to Ramleh, and he had absolutely no sign of trachoma. So it was all a ploy to get the grandson of Abdu'l Baha off the ship from Amin Farid. But for Shoghi Effendi, the repercussions were very serious because his dream was broken and his spiritual pain affected his physical health, and he lost a lot of weight. And things were not perfect for Abdu'l Baha either, because in the month of April 1912, he worries consistently over the health, the mental health, the spiritual health, the physical health of his grandson. So he wrote letters to Bahia Khanum, his beloved sister, the greatest holy leaf. Write to me at once about Shoghi Effendi's condition, informing me fully and hiding nothing. This is the best way. And another letter, kiss the light of the eyes of the company of the spiritual soul, so Shoghi Effendi. Kiss the fresh garden of sweetness, Shoghi Effendi. And he is right to worry about Shoghi Effendi, because Shoghi Effendi is going to take some time to recover from this. And later in 1912, after the spring of 1912, he returns to Beirut. This is a photograph of Beirut in the 1890s as a postcard. The forced separation from Abdu'l Baha hit Shoghi Effendi very hard. And it's important to remember that until the ascension of Abdu'l Baha, Shoghi Effendi is never, ever, ever truly happy when he is separated from his grandfather. That's one of the reasons why school is so difficult for him, because it's always boarding school and it's always in Lebanon, and Abdu'l Baha is always in Haifa. And this forced separation especially is hard on him because he was supposed to be at the master's side in the West, in America, fulfilling prophecy, watching the son of a manifestation of God, his own beloved grandfather, walk through New York and Los Angeles and Montreal and San Francisco, and he was deprived of that in the cruelest possible way. So he became very severely depressed and started falling ill and losing weight, as I said. And it took him a very long time to recover, several months. And eventually, he returned to school, but he was also unhappy there because obviously he was separated from his grandfather. And he would stay overnight with some Baha'i students on weekends. But once the school year was over, luckily, Shoghi Effendi was reunited with Abdu'l-Bahá. But let's look at first, before he goes to Egypt in 1913, let's just look at his first year, his freshman year at Syrian Protestant College, 1912, 1913. This is Syrian Protestant College, later known as the American University in Beirut. Beautiful picture. He started there in October 1912 to begin his Bachelor of Arts at Syrian Protestant College. And from the moment he went to university, Shoghi Effendi's only aim was to serve his grandfather in the most useful capacity possible. And that included mastering the English language. And that is going to become a passion for him. And he's going to dedicate himself to that, to acquiring English for the next 8 years. And it was, at the time, it was the best university in the Middle East. So this is a very prestigious university that Abdu'l-Baha's grandson is going to. He's going to go to the best university in the Middle East. And then in 2 weeks, we'll see him at Oxford, the best university in the West. Here is a photograph of Shoghi Effendi with the X on his lapel at Syrian Protestant College in 1913. So his freshman year, he took several several subjects like English, Arabic, French, history, geometry, the Bible, biology, and participated in a declamation contest in 4 languages in which he won first place for French. So he's also the secretary of the student union, and he played a small role in Shakespeare's The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, which was performed at the West Hall Auditorium. And then, of course, is September 1913, Shoghi Effendi's activities in Egypt. You see the pyramids here because when he traveled to Egypt at the age of 15, before his sophomore year at Syrian Protestant College, Shoghi Effendi traveled to Ramleh with the Greatest Holy Leaf and some members of the family. Shoghi Effendi occupied his time in Egypt with his beloved grandfather, and Abdu'l-Bahá would often have Shoghi Effendi chant for him, and he would teach him in his chanting. He would help him to modulate his voice to attain a certain emotion, making his chant more effective and beautiful. And Shoghi Effendi will keep all those lessons from Abdu'l-Bahá the rest of his life. The rest of his life, he's going to chant prayers in the shrines with the pilgrims and privately. Shoghi Effendi is a 15-year-old young man now. He's very active, very capable, very curious, very eager, very interested in everything. He joyfully renders the smallest of services, even if it's going and getting an Evian bottle of water for his grandfather from the house. But he also serves the master in more and more capacity. For example, he takes down letters to Persian believers that are dictated by Abdu'l-Bahá. He runs errands for his grandfather, meets visitors on his behalf at the train station. So his capacity has increased greatly. The reason that there are pyramids here is because there's a line in Priceless Pearl where Ruhiya Khanum ventures to guess that Shoghi Effendi lost no time in visiting the pyramids, for Shoghi Effendi had an adventurous spirit and longed to visit distant places, as witnessed by the keen interest it is recorded he showed in some travel magazines sent from America. So she believes he visited the pyramids. We don't know for sure, but it's a good guess. So 1913, 1914, sophomore year at Syrian Protestant College. 8th of March, 1914, a letter from Shoghi Effendi in Beirut. I want you to look at this map for just 1 second. It's a map that was made by Shoghi Effendi. It's a map of the Roman Empire. It's very, very beautifully done. Well labeled, exact. And it's in place of a map of America that's mentioned in the story below. So now Shoghi Effendi is 17 years old. And his passion of maps is already visible. He makes maps. We made at least two that we know, the Roman Empire map and the map of the United States. And he goes on to say that in this letter that he writes to one of Abdu'l-Bah's secretaries, he says he doesn't have any news from Abdu'l-Baha, but he hopes our Lord is in perfect health. And Shoghi Effendi, even though he is in Beirut, he follows the talks that Abdu'l-Baha gives very closely because they're disseminated by letter, and so he receives these letters, obviously, and asks the secretaries in Haifa to forward to him in Beirut any reference that Abdu'l-Baha makes in the future regarding a supreme tribunal, and to do that before the 20th of March, 1914. So it's very interesting because in the 17-year-old, you can see aspects of the character that will distinguish the Guardian for the rest of his life, such as this quote from this letter: "I have pretty near finished the map of the United States of America. It is a very picturesque and beautiful map. Please send me the list of the cities of the United States visited by our Lord, Abdu'l-Baha, in order one after the other. I will then be able to locate them in the map." These maps are things that Shoghi Effendi is going to be doing for the next 50 years. And in 1914, still 17 years old, Shoghi Effendi writes a letter to an eminent believer in Burma, which is now called Myanmar, Sayyid Mustafa Rumi. And this letter reads as though Shoghi Effendi is an adult. He tells Sayyid Mustafa Rumi, who in some 10 years or 15 years, he's going to appoint as a hand of the cause posthumously, as a future hand of the cause. He tells him that he is very pleased with the glad tidings of the rapid progress of the cause in the Far East. Very, very momentous turn of phrase for a 17-year-old. And after reading the letter to the master, he notices Abdu'l-Baha is smiling and that his heart is overflowing with joy. And these are moments where you know that Shoghi Effendi is perfectly happy. Talking about the growth of the faith in the presence of Abdu'l-Baha, these are the only moments that Shoghi Effendi is only really, truly, truly happy. Between 1913 and 1917, Shoghi Effendi came to Haifa regularly. Beirut and Haifa weren't far from each other. So he would come every vacation. And when Abdu'l-Baha had moved into the house at 7 Haparsim, Shoghi Effendi's room was a small one that was right next to Abdu'l-Baha's. So even in the house of the master, he was only separated by a wall from his beloved grandfather. Often, Shoghi Effendi would be working late with a lamp in his room, and Abdu'l-Baha would come into the room and say, "Enough, enough, go to sleep." But at the same time as Abdu'l-Baha was worried about Shoghi Effendi tiring himself out, he was extremely proud of the work ethic of Shoghi Effendi. That is something that Shoghi Effendi's nature was a serious nature, that he was hardworking, that he was dedicated, was something that always pleased Abdu'l-Baha beyond anything else. He did not want his grandson to be vain or easily distracted, and that was not Shoghi Effendi's nature at all. Abdu'l-Baha even told him once, when his family was somewhere in the house laughing about something and giggling, Abdu'l-Baha told Shoghi Effendi, "I do not want you to be like them, worldly." Another time when he was visiting, Abdu'l Baha was seated with his wife Munira Khanum and Shoghi Effendi, and he turned to his wife Munira Khanum and said, "Look at his eyes, clear like water." So he was able to express his deep love for Shoghi Effendi, but only in private, because always around were enemies, jealous enemies waiting to pounce. Now, this is an interesting thing that came out of one of Shoghi Effendi's visits to Haifa during his studies at Syrian Protestant College. Is you'll recall that the tablets of the Divine Plan mention very clearly every single territory in the world, very exactly. Did you ever wonder how Abdu'l Baha managed to get the geography so perfectly right? Other than the fact that he was, of course, infallible, he had a geography book. And this geography book was brought by one of the students at Syrian Protestant College that came to Haifa shortly before 1916 with his book and his friends. And Abdu'l Baha saw the book and said he would like this book. This exact book is the picture on the bottom here. It's the World Geography one-volume edition by Ralph Stockman Tarr and Frank Morton McMurray, which was published in 1912. And at the time that they would have been in, there was no other edition until 1916. So it would have contained the most accurate geographical data. And Abdu'l Baha, of course, looked at this geography book and asked the student if he could keep it. And the student was more than happy to give his book to Abdu'l Baha. This book is now in the United States National Baha'i Archives. So 1914, 1915 is sophomore year for Shoghi Effendi. And just give me a minute here. I seem to have lost the cap. There he is right here. So the portrait, the earlier portrait I had of just his face with the black fez is enlarged from this photograph here. So 1914, of course, World War I breaks out. And when Shoghi Effendi returns to university, there are a lot less students in Beirut. A lot of them haven't returned because of the war. Over 100 of his fellow students are not there. Syrian Protestant College admissions went down by 15% that year. And Ali Yazdi that year arrives. He's a couple of years younger than Shoghi Effendi. So he arrives as Shoghi Effendi is a sophomore. He arrives as a freshman. And a lot of Shoghi Effendi's students cannot go back to Europe or Egypt because of there's a naval blockade which restricts movements on the Mediterranean Sea. So a lot of the students come with Shoghi Effendi to Haifa. And they are lodged in one of the rooms of the Shrine of the Bab. This is the first article that we have that Shoghi Effendi published. It's called The Function of Sports in Life. And it's a very eloquent argumentation for sports. And it's illustrated. It has a little beautiful postcard at the bottom here. It's very carefully written. You can read the whole thing on the link that's on the chronology. We're not going to do that. But I will read you a cute little excerpt from it because I think it's really interesting. The word sports, and this is Shoghi Effendi writing. The word sport is a contracted form of disport, which means to amuse, to divert oneself. It includes play, amusement, entertainment, or recreation. It is a word which signifies the outdoor recreations, the athletic world, as contrasted with the serious intellectual occupation. And this is another side of Shoghi Effendi that will be lifelong. Shoghi Effendi will always see himself as a mountaineer. So sports, very arduous physical activity, is going to be a part of his life. And it's really wonderful to see in the 17-year-old all of these traits of the adult Shoghi Effendi. This is Howard Bliss, the president of Syrian Protestant College at the time that Shoghi Effendi was a student there. Abdu'l Baha wrote him a tablet during that time. and mentions in his tablet how highly Shoghi Effendi and the other Persian students regarded him. He says, the honored Dr. Bliss, the president of the American school. So this is a response to a letter that Dr. Bliss wrote, and this is Abdu'l Baha's response. Shoghi Effendi and the other Iranian students are greatly pleased with all of you and have spoken your praise to all the visitors traveling from Iran to Haifa. They have widely spread that the illustrious president is exceedingly compassionate and exerts great efforts towards the advancement of students. I pray that you excel in service to the world of humanity and become peerless in training and education of youth. I love this letter because Shoghi Effendi really liked his president at the time, Howard Bliss, and it feels like such a kind gesture on behalf of his grandson, whom he adores, for Abdu'l Baha to write such a kind letter to Howard Bliss, busy as he is. 1915, 1916, junior year at Syrian Protestant College. This is a sad, sweet last memory of Lua Getzinger, who leaves the Holy Land for the last time. This is Lua Getzinger here with a young girl who has her hand on her shoulder. Lua Getzinger had left India, where she'd been sent by Abdu'l Baha in 1913 on a very productive teaching trip on the 17th of November, 1914. And she arrived in Haifa at a time of great turbulence. In the months preceding, Haifa had been under constant threat of bombardment, which at times felt imminent. The war spread panic through Haifa and Akka, and the Baha'is and the children especially were terrified of the stories they were hearing. And Abdu'l Baha sent the Baha'is to a Druze village about 8 kilometers northeast of Bahji, because the village chief, Sheikh Salih, had extended an invitation to his village, putting his own home at Abdu'l Baha's disposal. About 8 kilometers, so that's where everybody was moved, 8 kilometers north of Bahji. And by September, Abdu'l Baha had arranged for his family and about 140 Baha'is and as many children to move from Haifa and Akka to Abu Sinan. So basically the entire population of the Baha'i population of Haifa and Akka is in these Druze villages up in the mountains, and there's only 2 people left in Haifa. Abdu'l Baha, who still has to serve the population and still has his duties, and Haji Mirza Haydar Ali, who was too old and too ill to travel. Just the 2 of them in Haifa. And Abdu'l Baha at that time, he would move between Haifa, Akka, and Bahji. So at Abdu'l Baha's request, they opened a school and a dispensary in the Abu Sinan, so the children could continue learning. And Lua Getzinger was there to help Dr. Habib Muayyad in the dispensary, so the infirmary, kind of. When things in Palestine got too dangerous, the other English lady who was here, Edith Sanderson, left the Holy Land. But 7 months later, so in around August, on the 30th of August, 1915, Lua had to leave as well, because it was not even halfway through the war. This was just the first year of the war, and things were getting very, very, very difficult. And in 1915, there was a famine that's going to kill 500,000 people in Lebanon, because the crickets the plague of crickets will come down and eat every single leaf and shrub and flower and blade of grass in the Middle East. It was awful because it was in the middle of the war when people were already under restrictions. So Abdu'l Baha revealed a tablet to serve as a letter of introduction for Lua Getzinger, praising her work in India, and she was going on now to Egypt. And on the 30th of August, 1915, Shoghi Effendi and several other Baha'is accompanied Lua Getzinger to her steamer, an American steamer called the Des Moines, which she left Palestine with 290 other evacuees. And they arrived in Port Said, Egypt in mid-September 1915, after they transferred onto a smaller Greek vessel in Crete. Tragically, Lua Getzinger would only spend 8 months in Cairo before dying of heart failure at the age of 43 on the 2nd of May, 1916, 2 years after her beloved teacher, Mirza Abul Fazl, and she was buried next to him. Abdu'l Baha, because of the war, didn't hear about her passing until 4 months later. And the Baha'is who were around Abdu'l Baha in Tiberias when he received the letter about Lua Getzinger's passing 4 months prior, they heard him say 100 times or more in a state of deep grief, "What a loss! What a loss! What a loss!" This is a photograph of Shoghi Effendi's junior year registration form for Syrian Protestant College. See, he accentuates the A on Rabbani and Hadi, but he hasn't formalized his spelling of his first name, Shoghi, yet. Spells Haifa Caiffa, and the profession of his father is merchant, Mirza Hadi Shirazi, and his nationality is Persian. So in junior year, 1915, 1916, Shoghi Effendi writes another paper. This is his article. It's much more technical. This one is, Shoghi Effendi argues the advantages of a constitution when you're trying to organize movements. And so he uses as an example the Syrian Protestant College student union. He encourages students to join the student union, explains parliamentary terms and phrases, gives clear and precise definitions of terms like adjournment and amendment. And he explains how motions are brought forth and provides a very intricate table of motions at the end of the essay. Talks a lot in this article about the importance of laws and bylaws. Shoghi Effendi and Ali Yazdi in Beirut. This is a photograph of Ali Yazdi around the time that he was in Beirut from Blessings Beyond Measure. So they've been friends now for 5-6 years because they met in 1910, and this is in 1915, 1916. In 1914, Ali Yazdi and his family moved to Beirut. So now Beirut is his home, and he's also going to be attending college there at the same time as Shoghi Effendi. And when he begins attending Syrian Protestant College, their friendship, which is already 6 years strong, becomes even stronger. They are very, very close. Ali's room is right across the hallway from Shoghi Effendi's. Ali Yazdi describes Shoghi Effendi as bouncing with energy and having a wonderful personality, always joyful and optimistic, and he would burst into laughter or a smile would break on his face, and he had beautiful, expressive eyes. This is another modern-day building from the Syrian Protestant College, now American University of Beirut. Shoghi Effendi, I love this. Shoghi Effendi has his favorite things sent to him in Beirut from Haifa. So some of the things he loved were delicious brown home-baked bread, honey and dried fruits and nuts. And the fruits from Haifa and Lebanon were just absolutely delicious. And so Shoghi Effendi would invite Ali Yazdi in his room, and the two of them would sit together and enjoy this package of goodies from Haifa, delicious treats while talking and having just a wonderful time. Shoghi Effendi was very, very generous from his early childhood and always treated his friends with incredible generosity. Shoghi Effendi and Ali Yazdi talked about everything. They talked about the future, where they were going to go and study, and Shoghi Effendi was always speaking, even as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, of the faith spreading around the world, all over the world. His main passion for even before he was guardian, that was what he loved to talk about. And another one of Shoghi Effendi's passions was that everybody should serve the faith. To Ali Yazdi, it seemed like the progress of the faith and universal service were Shoghi Effendi's main ambitions. Even as a teenager, Shoghi Effendi's entire being was tethered to the covenant. His only ambitions were not for himself, not for his career. They were for his faith. This perfectly describes the attitude of the guardian during his 36 years of guardianship as well. Although Ali Yazdi was the son of a distinguished pioneer family from Egypt, and Shoghi Effendi was the descendant of the Bab's family and Baha'u'llah's family and Abdu'l-Baha's grandson, when they were together, they were just friends, happy in each other's company, sharing their vision and their creativity. In the summers, when the Syrian Protestant College Baha'i students came to Mount Carmel, to Haifa, they were housed in the original shrine, the shrine with doors, I think at the time that Abdu'l Baha finished it, there were 5 doors on it. And then Shoghi Effendi added 3 doors onto it. And they were lodged, obviously, in one of the anterooms. So that wouldn't be the rooms that you would come in for the threshold to bow and pray. At the time, there was obviously only the Shrine of the Bab here. So it would have been those outer rooms probably here. Senior year at Syrian Protestant College, 1916, 1917. And this again is the registration form for that year for Shoghi Effendi. This would be Shoghi Effendi's senior year. And the new courses that he enrolled in senior year were more advanced. So we had English rhetoric, Arabic rhetoric, psychology, engineering, law, astronomy, and sociology. But the atmosphere under which Shoghi Effendi completed his senior year was deeply marked by the war and by the misery that was around him. The locust plague of 1915, which I've mentioned earlier, killed 500,000 people in Lebanon, where he is going to school, and Syria, the next country over. And although the college was protected, the food supply for the students also began to dwindle. Shoghi Effendi graduated from Syrian Protestant College with a Bachelor of Arts degree on the 13th of June, 1917, in a graduating class where there were only 10 students. And so we're just going to spend a few minutes now looking at the situation of World War I and the respective, the life of Abdu'l Baha and Shoghi Effendi during the First World War. So Shoghi Effendi in Beirut during World War I. This photograph is an overturned German AEG C-4 aircraft in Beirut, Lebanon, at a time when Shoghi Effendi was a student at the college. So you see that the German planes crashed right on his doorstep. It's not like he was separated from the war. It came right to his doorstep. And during the war, Syrian Protestant College, just like everyone else in Beirut, suffered severe shortages, which led to famine. And Ali Yazdi ventured out once and saw women dying of hunger in the streets of the city. He was so heartbroken that no one paid attention to them and to their plight that he did not venture out again. He preferred to stay on campus rather than have his heart broken by a situation he could do nothing to alleviate. So you see right outside the walls of Syrian Protestant College, where Ali Yazdi and Shoghi Effendi are, there were people dying of hunger, there were planes crashing, German planes crashing. Thanks to President Bliss, who had received that tablet from Abdu'l Baha, he was close to the ruthless Palestinian leader Jamal Pasha, who was just a monster, absolute monster. Many committed so many atrocities during the war, but he was close to Jamal Pasha, and so the Syrian Protestant College received rations because of his friendship with Jamal Pasha. Mainly, of course, because in the region, Syrian Protestant College was the only university that trained doctors and nurses and surgeons, which were needed for the war effort, as well as engineers and other professions that were needed. So that was Shoghi Effendi's life during World War I. Abdu'l Baha's life during World War I is marked by a need to do everything he can to alleviate suffering everywhere he can. Abdu'l Baha had foreseen the coming of World War I almost 14, 15 years prior, and he had begun large agricultural projects in the Jordan Valley, around the Sea of Galilee, and he had constantly advised he always gave very, very pragmatic, detailed agricultural advice. Nothing vague, very like, plant this tree at this place, and when you gather the grain, bury it in underground corn pits or Roman underground pits. And when the locusts arrived to destroy all of the Middle East, Abdu'l Baha's grain, whom he had told people to bury in underground pits, obviously was not destroyed by the locusts because it was underground. But no amount of foresight about World War I could ever shield Abdu'l Baha from the reality of the destruction of this conflict. Shoghi Effendi described his grandfather's heartbreak during World War I in God Passes By, which he would write 30 years from this date. And he said, agony filled his soul, Abdu'l Baha's soul, at the spectacle of human slaughter precipitated through humanity's failure to respond to the summons he had issued or heed the warnings he had given. He's speaking about Abdu'l Baha's travels to the West during 1910 and 1913, where Abdu'l Baha ceaselessly warned people that a conflict was coming and to heed his warning, but to no avail. The next year, 1917, 1918, so the year the war ends, is graduate school at Syrian Protestant College for Shoghi Effendi. And in this section, I'm just going to read a few excerpts from his notebooks. This is Shoghi Effendi as he was before he went to Oxford with a sash and longer robes, white pants and a long overcoat. Shoghi Effendi kept notebooks his entire life. And later, as guardian, he would track all sorts of data and numbers in them. But he would also keep track of some of the things at Syrian Protestant College, which are very cute. I think there's no other way for that. The dates that ice was delivered to the house that he was living in Beirut. But also systematic lists of the Baha'i calendar, a list of basic principles of the faith, French language notes on periods for the Hebrew prophets, solar and lunar calculations, measurements, weights, copies of tablets, but also the Abjad system of numerology. I think lists like this are a good way to get an idea of how just in love with information Shoghi Effendi was, and how he was fascinated by everything. Summer 1917 in Haifa, vignettes from Ali Yazdi's pilgrimage. This is the most great prison in the early 20th century, I think. This is where Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l Baha and the Baha'i exiles were housed between 1868 and 1870 when they first arrived in the Holy Land. In the summer of 1917, when Ali Yazdi was 18, he traveled to the Holy Land to visit his uncle, who was living in Haifa. He traveled overland on horseback along the Mediterranean coast, and it was just beautiful. He overlooked steep mountains and looked down on the waves of Mediterranean Sea beating against the rocks. At times, he passed through cornfields or wheat fields along the shore. Ali finally arrived in Akka and fell asleep on the floor, totally exhausted. The next day, he went to Haifa and entered the presence of Abdu'l Baha. During his time in Haifa, on pilgrimage, Ali Yazdi had the bounty of seeing Abdu'l Baha every morning around dusk. The Baha'is gathered in the front of the master's hall, sitting on the wall, waiting for Abdu'l Baha until he came out of the house with a cheerful smile, warmly welcoming them and taking his seat at the top of the stairs. Sometimes Abdu'l Baha spent time with the Baha'is not speaking. But most evenings he spoke in a commanding voice, looking straight ahead at posterity, or so Ali Yazdi felt. Abdu'l Baha would ride to the shrine of the Bab in his old horse-drawn carriage while the Baha'is walked up Mount Carmel and met at the shrine. Abdu'l Baha usually was the one who chanted the tablet of visitation, but sometimes he asked now 20-year-old Shoghi Effendi to chant it. As the believers filed out of the shrine, Abdu'l Baha dropped a little rose water in their hands. Ali Yazdi also visited Bahchi and the shrine of Baha'u'llah, and once followed Abdu'l Baha as he walked among the pines on Mount Carmel. Ali Yazdi liked spending time in Abdu'l Baha's garden and speaking to the gardener, Ismail Aqa. At dinner, although he himself ate little, Abdu'l Baha would always insist that everyone eat enough food. And he told Ali, who was hungry but too shy to eat, why aren't you eating? Why aren't you eating, Sheikh Ali? And Abdu'l Baha would put a large heap of rice on Ali's plate. Abdu'l Baha always called him Sheikh Ali, and later Shoghi Effendi would often tease him, calling him Sheikh. During Ali's visit, Abdu'l Baha traveled by horse-drawn carriage to Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee, and Adassieh to oversee the wheat being sowed, precious grain that would save many lives in the year to come and would even feed the British Army. Shoghi Effendi and Ali Yazdi spent a lot of time together that summer, along with several of their other friends, a very happy group. And now, Shoghi Effendi in graduate school. This is more the Shoghi Effendi that we know, with the long overcoat, more Western clothes, and the dark fez. This photograph is with his cousin, Ruhi Afnan, who broke the covenant. When Shoghi Effendi returned to Syrian Protestant College on the 9th of October 1917, he was now a graduate student. 3 months into his first term, Shoghi Effendi wrote to his beloved grandfather, telling him he had arrived happily and safely at the university after weathering cold and rain on the way to Beirut, and said, "I have resumed my studies, directing and concentrating all my efforts on them and doing my utmost to acquire that which will benefit and prepare me to serve the cause in the days to come." Very sweet addition to this letter is that he pours out his love to his grandfather and ends, "I have sent you by post a piece of cheese, hoping it will be acceptable to thee, before signing it, thy lowly and humble servant Shoghi." In a time of war, especially when the war is raging towards the end, the 1917, 1918, for Shoghi Effendi, who's writing from a country where 500,000 people just died of starvation, to be sending a piece of cheese by post is a very, very precious gift. In 1923, Shoghi Effendi would write a letter to Professor Dodge that was now at the American University in Beirut. And in this letter, he would refer to the former Syrian Protestant College as this great educational institution in the Near East, to which I feel so deeply indebted. Once Shoghi Effendi completed his first year of graduate school in Beirut, he returned to Haifa to serve his beloved grandfather full-time for the rest of his grandfather's earthly life, almost. And those would be the happiest and most unforgettable months of his life. And that, my friends, is a story that I will tell you next week. The 2 happiest years in the life of Shoghi Effendi, finally serving his grandfather. That's going to be from, let's see if, there you go. The Guardian Part 3, 1918, 1920, Abdu'l-Bahá secretary. And that's for next week. This is all for today. It was a shorter session than usual. Thank you all.